In the last lecture, we were talking about ways that the United States was becoming more small d democratic through the Industrial Revolution in the early part of the 19th century. Today, what I would like to talk about with you is the change in the social structure, the change in the physical appearance of the United States, the change in the way that society functioned. And to begin, I want to talk about the costs and the benefits of industrialization. I mean, this is the major change that America is undergoing, the Industrial Revolution, especially in the North, throughout the early part of the 19th century. The benefits are higher standards of living. As we become better at making things, shoes, for example, the price comes down because there's more of them, and so more people can afford to buy them. You see better clothes, better homes, better, I guess what you and I would call consumer items. And again, a lot of this goes back to the process of production, mass producing these things in high volumes so that more and more people can afford to buy them. The costs of this is the elimination, or at least jeopardization, of various job classifications. We've talked about what was happening to the shoemaker throughout the Industrial Revolution. You could make a case for a lot of other skilled craft positions for that. But the other big conflict that I'd like you to be mindful of here is class conflict, all right? You see the emergence of what you and I call social classes, upper class, middle class, working class, that really emerges through the Industrial Revolution. Now, before the Industrial Revolution, you had people of all varieties that are continuously rubbing elbows, interacting with one another, or at least on a scale that's much larger than what happens after the Industrial Revolution. Not only do you have more and more workers fighting with their bosses, that's essentially what class conflict means, you have fewer workers that are interacting on a day-to-day basis with people that are controlling their labor, their bosses, their economic superiors. Okay, so class conflict is very much a part of this change in the social structure, and it's also very much a part of this story that you're seeing emerge as to how industrialization is changing life in the United States. Let me throw a few numbers at you just so that we have a good understanding of what we're talking about. Three classes that I need you to understand, and all three of these classes are primarily produced by the Industrial Revolution. You've got your business elite, and for your notes, these are your wealthy planters in the South. In the North, you're talking about people like urban merchants, financiers, your business elite. Now, you take these people together, and they're probably on their best day, but maybe 5% of the population. But collectively, this 5% owns 40% of the wealth in the United States. And so I guess what you should probably take away from this is that the wealth is stubbornly concentrated at the upper end of the economic ladder. Very few amount of people control a huge chunk of the wealth. That can be problematic for a number of different reasons. Next, we see the emergence of a middle class. And as far as middle class, I'm talking about people like doctors, lawyers, professionals, middling farmers, not huge, but also not the Yemen farmers either, and small-time businessmen. Now, this middle class is growing, but it's very small right now. It's not a very big group when it comes to the American political economy. More than anything else, what industrialization is producing, especially in the North, places like New York and Boston, it's producing urban workers, okay? Lots and lots of people like Sam Patch that have no other recourse other than to sell their labor in the labor market. You've got day laborers, you've got unskilled workers, and as you'll see toward the end of this lecture, you see immigrants coming over from places like Ireland and Germany. In the South, you've got landless white workers that are basically living as sharecroppers, as tenant farmers. They work the land, and technically they're free, but ultimately they're subservient to their landlords. So the point that I want you to take away from this slide here is that the economy is booming, but it's really important for you to understand who it's booming for, right? The economy is producing a whole lot more unskilled, low-paid wage earners than it is people like Leedy Stone from your book, Sam Patch, rich people that own the means of production. Now, the other thing that you see throughout the early and mid 19th century is a middle class impulse to really clean up working class America. There's a great movie that I always contemplate assigning for this class. Leonardo DiCaprio is in it, Daniel Day-Lewis is in it, Cameron Diaz is in it. It's called Gangs of New York. In that film, you see these middle class reformers going into New York City, trying to reform the working class, clean it up, get it on its feet, help. That's really self-improvement, self-help is really what you're talking about. During this period, the closest group to the working class would be the middle class, and I mean that in terms of physical proximity. Okay, they live closer to the working class than your business elites do. And there's also this philosophy that you should help those that are not as fortunate as you. It's very important to the middle class and will remain so for the rest of the 19th century and a little bit of the early 20th century. There are clear religious overtones to this, that what this is about is doing God's work as far as the Christian faith is concerned. But the institution that I'd like you to be mindful of would be the benevolent empire, okay? And the benevolent empire was a more than not religious sort of effort on behalf of the middle class to go into working class America and really teach industrious habits, teach habits that would lend themselves to not only pulling yourself up by your bootstrap, but stabilizing life for a working class family. To do that, the benevolent empire assumed that they would have to combat these social evils. So they went after things like gambling, tried to instruct working class Americans not to gamble. They went after things like prostitution. They went after things, crime, vice, various ways of really kind of sobering and cleaning up working class America. But as events begin to unfold, there becomes one social evil that becomes sort of like the central cog for the benevolent empire, and that would be combating alcohol or alcoholism. These reformers, middle-class reformers, believed that if you took alcohol out of the equation, you could destroy all these other social evils. They would all fall like dominoes. Prostitution would go down, gambling would go down, crime, vice, fisticuffs, domestic abuse, orphanages, all of these things would go down if you could just eliminate the bottle, right? There's a cartoon in the, well, not a cartoon in the traditional sense, but a political cartoon inside this change in the social structure PowerPoint slide, if you want to follow along with me. And it's labeled the benevolent empire. And inside there, you see this cartoon that's labeled the drunkard's process. And this was a 10-step process as far as the benevolent empire was concerned. And you take that first drink and you're not really thinking that you're hurting anyone or doing any harm to anything in particular. But as you can see, by step 9, things have gone terribly, terribly wrong. You're committing suicide and you're orphaning your wife and child. So this is the kind of message that the benevolent empire was sending to working class America. How do you think it was received? Yeah, if you've been following along closely in Sam Pax, there's not too many working class Americans that really appreciate middle class reformers coming in and telling them how to live. And for that matter, there weren't too many upper class Americans that really appreciated this either. This is maybe a sidetrack, but I'm going to tell you anyway. One of the things that's really important for early 19th century sport, as well as the film Gangs of New York, was the institution and sport of boxing, or what you would call boxing. They would more or less call it prize fighting. But anyway, the sport of boxing really thrived with two social groups in American life, two very oddly coupled groups. One was the working class. I mean, that was the way that you could kind of go from rags to riches. It was sort of the 19th century version of the lottery. Working class Americans oftentimes served as the fighters. There weren't too many middle class Americans that were going out there into the prize fighting ring. And the other group that was consuming the fight, watching it for entertainment, that would be your upper class. And so when the middle-class benevolent empire went into a place like New York City and said, not only do we need to eliminate alcohol, we also need to eliminate prize fighting, the two biggest pushbacks they got was from obviously the working class, but also the upper class. And so by being able to throw their socio-political weight around, the institution that is prize fighting is going to survive well into the late 19th century. What you're beginning to see is the evolution of two world views, two outlooks. One would be based on morality. Workers and lower middle class Americans want a republic that is guided by moral justice, or what they consider to be moral justice. And to that end, what they mean is, no, there's not an official law, nor necessarily should there be, that says that you don't have to pay your workers a living wage. You don't have to pay your workers a minimum wage. You can pay them, next to nothing, and you can get away with this. This is your right as a business owner. But that doesn't mean that you should do that. What they're trying to do is get the government to more or less establish policies that at least put everybody on a somewhat equal playing field, hence the expression moral justice. If everybody's at an equal starting point, or at least on paper has the ability to quote-unquote make it, that's much more small d democratic in the minds of workers and middle-class people than the kind of world that's emerging in a story like Sam Patch. Employers and business owners wanted a society that was based on individualism, right? That if you're a good, hardworking, had a good attitude individual, anybody could make it. I mean, what they pointed to kind of counteract the idea of moral justice is the marketplace. And as they said, the marketplace doesn't care if you're white or black or rich or poor or, immigrant or native born. If you've got a good idea and you work at it and it sells well, people want to buy it, you can become rich. And so they pointed to something called the equality of opportunity, that theoretically everybody already is starting at the same starting point, because anybody can get into this free market and make it for themselves. So let the market take care of this whole issue of justice, and the market will give us justice, okay? As you might imagine, this is going to lead to more class conflict, as is the process of immigration. Between 1840 and 1860, massive waves of immigration hits the United States shores. Now, this isn't anything all that new, nor is it going to go anywhere anytime soon. Those of you that go on to take History 1302 are going to see that this is a huge issue early on in the class in the late 19th century. But I want you to understand that you're talking about immigration from places like Germany, and especially places like Ireland. The cause and effect of all of this. In Ireland, it's real simple. Germany, people are being pushed off their land. They see an opportunity to come to the United States, which is expanding economically. It is expanding, and they take it up. But the Irish have an even more direct cause, and that would be the potato famine of the 1840s and forward. Almost 90% in some instances of the Irish diet in Ireland was based off of potatoes. And when that crop began to fail in the 1840s, what it produced was a famine where people were starving to death. And so therefore, a lot of Irish people said, we don't have any kind of recourse, we must go to a place that has better opportunity. And one of those places was the United States. And so you have coastal cities like Boston, like New York, and various parts of the South. It's not as direct in the South as it is in the North, but they're coming. And when they're coming, they're bringing over some of their culture with them. What kind of religion do the Irish, and to a lesser extent the Germans, practice? Catholicism. And you should know, through the processes of the First and Second Great Awakening, we saw ourselves by the 1850s as a fundamentally and fiery Protestant country. There's a lot of people that said you can't really be American if you're not Protestant, okay? And so you see this clear anti-Catholic sentiment that begins to emerge in places like Boston, where you would see a political cartoon of St. Patrick's Day parade, where the demonstrators, the marchers, the paraders, they would be Irish immigrants depicted as apes or monkeys or barbarians whacking each other over the head with clubs. Okay? Clear anti-Catholic and anti-Irish sentiment. Irish Americans were treated as second-class citizens. They were discriminated against. They were looked down upon. It wasn't anything out of the ordinary at all to see a sign in a window that would say something like, now hiring, Irish need not apply. In other words, we're not taking your kind here. Okay. Around about this time, we see one of the best-selling books in the country evolve, and it's called The Foreign Conspiracy Against the Liberties of the United States. And it is the anti-Catholic Bible in the 1850s. Okay. There's this perception that because the Irish are Catholic, they're not going to be loyal to the people of the United States, let alone somebody like the President or the Congress. They're going to take their marching orders from Rome, from the Vatican. Okay? They're going to be loyal to the Pope first, and maybe anybody else second. So this is sort of one of the bases of this anti-Catholic kind of sentiment. But for your notes, the Irish are persecuted on two fronts. On the one, when they come over, they're poor and desperate, and so therefore they take the lowest paying jobs, the meanest, nastiest jobs. And secondly, you're seeing an unmistakable anti-immigrant sentiment, which if you choose to see the film, Gangs of New York, is very, very vivid. It's very visible in that film. This anti-immigrant sentiment is ultimately going to translate into anti-Irish sentiment, and the Irish are going to be treated as second-class citizens. And so whether you're talking about class conflict or whether you're talking about immigration and later on anti-immigration sentiments, this is all a product of what we've been talking about for the last several classes, the Industrial Revolution. What we're going to do now is talk about the political ramifications of the industrialization of the United States. And this can probably be seen most directly in the election of 1824 and especially in the election of 1828 with Andrew Jackson. So that's where we'll pick it up the next time we meet.